Good morning, guys. Hope you guys are having a good week. I wanted to take you through our explanations and the theories for today's assignment, and then I'll explain the assignment and how to complete it. And you guys can get creative with it as best you can. So on the left side of our screen here, we have our acronym for the last section. It's BEAT, B-E-A-T. You can remember that by just thinking Jesus beat death or beat the grave. But the first one is the burial. This is what you guys read about, and there's all the conspiracy theories or swoon or wrong tomb, hallucination, disciples made it up, or that God rose Jesus from the dead. So those are our theories that we're working with. And every piece on the left has some evidence, or it wouldn't really be a good theory, with what actually happened, those events that actually happened. So we know that Jesus was buried. And the conspiracy theory says the disciples stole the body. So no one argues that the body wasn't there to begin with. It checks the empty tomb box. But if the disciples stole the body, then the last two don't get checked. Because when you start answering for the appearances of Jesus and the transformation of the disciples, it gets really hard to justify how those things could happen when he was stolen. The transformation of the disciples doesn't make sense. The swoon is the apparent death theory, that he was in a coma maybe when they took him off the cross. Maybe he wasn't dead, but he recovered later. It doesn't account for the fact that he was dead when they took him off the cross, and you've got a lot of evidence to go against there with the mixture of blood and water. It does explain the empty tomb, that if he somehow was healed and then left, and it does explain the appearances, because if he'd never died, then you could explain the appearances. And it wouldn't explain the transformation of the disciples, because they wouldn't fully trust in Jesus for salvation, because that transformation never took place. The wrong tomb theory is probably the weakest one. They knew exactly where they laid the body. It doesn't explain the death or burial because he would still be dead, and definitely doesn't explain the appearances or the transformation. That one's a weak one. You explain the empty tomb, but they would just go to the correct tomb and produce the body. The hallucination theory explains the burial, but it doesn't explain the empty tomb. And it kind of explains the appearances, or at least it tries to. But medically, group hallucinations wouldn't happen like that, even in grieving, or the disciples wanted to see Jesus alive. Hallucinations wouldn't work, especially when you have 500 people at one time. They all obviously didn't know Jesus as the disciples did, so they wouldn't fit that evidence. And it would explain the transformation if they believed they saw the risen Jesus, but you run into some problems here with the empty tomb. They would have just produced the actual body. And then the appearances of Jesus, it doesn't fully satisfy that. It tries to, but the theory is flawed from the get-go. The fact that the disciples lied, this one is unique. It kind of goes along with the conspiracy theory. But the fact that the disciples lied, all it does is it checks the fact that he was buried. It doesn't really check that there was an empty tomb or the appearances. They just lied the whole time. Lying doesn't really satisfy the transformation of the disciples, all of them going to their death, except for one of them dying of old age, we believe. everyone else eventually getting killed for spreading the gospel. At what point do they just say, okay, I'm sorry, we lied, we made it up, please stop imprisoning me and stoning me and beating me to death? And then obviously our last option, kind of like Lord Larry Lunatic, is he really was the Son of God and God rose him from the dead. It does satisfy all the 4 historical facts that we have. So what you guys are going to be doing today is I want you to come up with your own theory. It can be a combination of these. You can get very creative with it. I do want it to be 2 pages double spaced. You're telling a story. You're telling a story and you're getting creative with what that could look like. It really is just trying to check as many boxes as you can. Obviously knowing that there's 4 historical facts that you have to work around. You're not going to be able to fully satisfy all of those, but it's fun to kind of test the theory a little bit and make sure that we're not missing anything. So that's what this is for. I've had some really creative stuff that's very outlandish as far as aliens and all that stuff. I've had some stuff that's very similar to some of these theories right here that are a little bit different in nature, that they think, oh, well, this theory is great except for this flaw. So they take that out and they kind of change it. You're free to do that. The purpose of this assignment is to test the theories and to test and see what holds up against these facts. And again, the question is, what best explanation are we going with that fits the evidence? We have to fit the evidence. We can't just create something that we think, oh, this is what happens. Well, then we have to check it back with fitting the evidence. So be creative with it, create a new theory, and submit it on Google Classroom. If you have any questions, jump on tutorials or email me. Thanks, guys.